locked into the very stones is the reality that our sin brings death. Scientists believe the glaciers that covered this area were 1 to 2 miles deep. We're talking 20 miles of snow in order to compact down and make 2 miles of ice. You have a tree standing upright for millions of years without ever toppling over. It makes absolutely no sense. The mighty acts of God are true at a time when many denominations and many churches have denied God's word and have quit teaching what it says. The rocks themselves are crying out to the reality and the truth of this event. So as we talk about creation, why does geology matter? I mean, who cares about geology, rocks? Well, if you get the rocks wrong, you're going to get everything else wrong. You're going to get the time frame of the Earth wrong. You're going to get the understanding of why these rock layers contain fossils wrong. You're actually going to end up totally misunderstanding the very character of God Himself, the very nature of God, when you misunderstand the history of the rocks and what they tell us about this planet. For instance, let me tell you a story, an actual factual account of one young man who got the rocks wrong and what it led to. Now you have to go clear back to the 1700s to understand the background and the thinking of what was happening in this young man's mind. Now in the 1700s, the church leaders were, in essence, the leaders and the intellectuals of the day. They were the ones with a higher education. They were the ones that taught the next generation about truth and reality and, in essence, where things came from. The young man I'm talking about was born in the early 1800s, and as a very intelligent man from a fairly well-to-do family, he was sent to college and he was studying theology, and he was going to be a pastor, in essence. Now, he decided that's not what he wanted to do with his life. What he really wanted to do was be a naturalist. Now, the word naturalist was the word used 200 years ago to mean scientist. They studied the natural world around them to understand things about it. The scientific revolution was going on. We're really starting to understand where things came from, how the natural world operated. And folks would collect various plants and animals and go on travels and come back and lecture in the concert halls of the day. This is what this young man wanted to do. So he signed up for a 5-year journey, and he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. One of the first places he came to was Argentina. Now, this young man took with him essentially 2 books. One was the Bible. Remember, he was a theology student. The other was a book called Principles of Geology by a man named Charles Lyell. Now, Charles Lyell to this day is called the father of modern geology. He, along with others of his generation, had been trained that there was never a worldwide flood, because a worldwide flood would have created the rock layers of this planet very rapidly. All the sediments would have settled to form sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock, limestone, sandstone, mudstone, coal, shale, it covers about 75% of the Earth's surface. Well, if there wasn't a worldwide flood that created these rock layers, where did they come from? He would look at enormously thick layers of rock and say it must have taken enormous periods of time to have slowly, gradually made these rock layers. In other words, he proposed a theory called Uniformitarianism. Slow, gradual processes we see today can be extended enormous periods into the past to explain enormous geological changes that created the rock layers and the river valleys and the seams of sediment that we see. Well, he collected thousands of observations that supported this idea, put them in the book called Principles of Geology, and our young explorer took this book with him, and he was highly influenced by this thinking. In other words, his brain was trained to think in that way and filter everything he saw through that viewpoint. Well, he arrives in Argentina. He sees the Santa Cruz River Valley, a little teeny river at the bottom of an enormous valley. He thinks to himself, it must have taken millions of years, enormous periods of time, for that little river to have carved out this huge valley, a little grain of sand at a time over eons and eons of time. And he could find seashells way up high in the sediment layers, meaning over huge periods of time, the land surface must have slowly rose out of the ocean as the ocean deposited these sediment layers. Now, he took this same mindset. Little changes over enormous periods of time, creating the geology of our planet, which is just an interpretation, not a fact. It's just a philosophical viewpoint. And he sailed on around South America and ended up at the Galapagos Islands. Now, I think already many of you know what I'm talking about, Charles Darwin. And on this island he saw finches with many different sized beaks. And he thought to himself, maybe you have those different shaped beaks and different shaped birds because as one generation had another and another and another and another, over eons and eons of time, maybe one kind of an animal could have turned into a completely different kind of animal. So he totally misinterpreted the data that led him to believe into geological evolution, and that led him to believe in biological evolution. Little changes, lots of time changing one animal into another. You see, if these rock layers are filled with millions and trillions of dead animals that have formed over millions and billions of years, that means there's been death and disease and bloodshed and extinctions for millions of years. Well, that's long before mankind appeared, according to modern textbooks. So who's responsible for death and disease and bloodshed and extinctions? It can't be mankind or his actions because he wasn't around. God himself must be the author of death if those rock layers are that old. You see, the misunderstanding of the rock layers affects our very perception of the very character of God. All evolution is a story to try to explain everything as if God doesn't even exist. And it gets geology wrong, it gets biology wrong, it gets the age of the universe wrong because it starts by leaving God's word out.